It is 5 o'clock. It looks like we're ready to get started. And just for everyone with us and in the audience, well, first of all, I'll call the Concord Carlisle Joint School Committee meeting to order. And for the minutes, I will just note that all members are present. We have Aisha Lawton with us and Andrew Niamichi. We have Dr. Blake and Dr. Warnham and Kristen Herbert. And that's it for now. This is our new gadget in the room. So it's a Zoom recording type of situation. So whoever is speaking, so if you're on the Zoom, you can see that I'm speaking. It's following the voice of whoever's talking.
Wow. Voice and camera will follow. So we're very technically hybrid and self-sufficient, which is the
perfect.
goal.
I love it. Perfect. So we have that going. So the meeting is being recorded. And we will start with our public comment. And just as a reminder, a public comment period will be a period of no more than 20 minutes. This is a meeting in the public and not with the public. So the school committee will not be responding to any comments. If you're in the room and you would like to speak, you can submit a blue form to me and you will be called to speak. If you're on Zoom, you can use the raise hand feature. When called to speak, please state your name and address before you speak. And we'll go every other starting in the room and then on Zoom. So do we have any public comment in the room? No, I don't see any. Do we have, okay. We have two people. Do you have a blue form too? I see one. Okay, sorry. That's okay. Can you grab one?
Forms are out there. There's no mic tonight. You can stand at the end of the table and it'll pick you up.
Yep, right at the end. Thank you. Mr. Egri.
I have been informed, I hope correctly, for I have no written evidence thereof, that in the past, the CCH has organized trips abroad, most have been exclusively, and this is what I was told, Eurocentric tourist visits. Cities such as London, Paris, or Rome. Granted, these could be very educational for the largest arts promote, but just maybe in our post-pandemic age of the just maybe to send our students to places that would reflect a more diverse population with vibrant reality and history. I am thinking of school trips to places such as Africa or Lagos, Nigeria. For the more adventurous, there is Kampala, Rwanda, and Kinshasa, Congo. And if those great metropolises, with Lagos and Kinshasa being the two greatest in sub-Saharan Africa, are too far to travel geographically, as South Africa, with the birthplace of Nelson Mandela, would definitely be a city such as Caracas, Venezuela, or Tegucigalpa, Honduras, might also be very exciting and educational places to visit. Of course, I will suggest that they just hang around in museums or see other tourist locations with safari. Rather, they ought also to visit vibrant rural areas far away from the metropolis and spend as much time as possible with the locals and thereby get a truly deep multicultural immersion with a never to forget experience for the rest of their lives. When last December, I sent these suggestions to both the PTO and the school administration, I was expecting at least some reply. To my disappointment, it was completely ignored by all the addressees, but why? Why it has been ignored by all of you, including Dr. Hunter, Mr. Mastrullo, and Mr. Yamakia? This is a serious question. Why would you ignore the pedagogical value of this great continent on which the Council of Foreign Relations declared the future is Africa? I am sure that Ms. Rachel Gore-Freed, a woman of color from Carlisle, and an internationally recognized human rights lawyer specializing in African affairs, would be delighted to offer freely her deep knowledge to organize and personally lead such a fact-finding trip with Mr. Nyarmakia, who himself is from Ghana. I understand that in my letter to you, I use the word Africa, and this word might be hurtful to some people causing emotional distress. I am now aware that etymologically most likely has originated in the Phoenician Semitic word afar, meaning ashes or dust, and as such it was applied by the Roman colonizers to Carthage, that is now Libya. And there, here, 23 centuries later, we are still referring to the continent with a word that the racist slaveholders of Rome used clearly as an insult. Sadly, I have no other word at my disposal, but if that was the reason for ignoring my letter to you, then please help me, how I should express myself better, and I will gladly oblige. And I eagerly await your answer to my suggestion. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you. And now we'll go on to Zoom. If anyone at home would like to speak, please raise your hand. I don't see anyone. So Leslie Fisher.
evening. Like some of you.
Can you
I
state your
read-
name and address? I'm sorry, just for the minutes, I'm sorry.
43 Mill Street.
Thank you.
Like many of you, I read the article in the Globe today about the Woodburn. About the Woodburn. School system's efforts at making children of color, LGBTQ students, and any so-called atypical student feel more welcome and integral part of the community. I think it perfectly illustrates the importance of DEI and belonging efforts, and I hope naysayers will find a way to take that message to heart and not be so afraid of challenges to their preconceived notions of what it's all about. I look forward to hearing the DEI report tonight and to following what further measures the Concord school system will put in place to ensure all students can participate in classes and non-academic activities with more comfort and ease, and therefore improved learning and socialization. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, next we have Joe Palumbo.
Good evening, Joe Palumbo, 90 Black Horse Place here in Concord. And I'm here tonight because I'm eager to see the hard work you all have done to put together this report, and just to remind folks the importance of public education, which you all know. I grew up here in Concord. I went to this school, and the only reason I was able to go to college and get an education was the good teachers that I had that talked to my parents and helped them understand the importance of education. And I value that every day in my career as well. I was as an educator. So in terms of the hard work you're doing on diversity, equity, and inclusion, I just know that that's another way of really talking to students and their families to help make sure Concord Carlisle and Concord Public Schools is helping build students' lives, because only often the intervention of public school that makes a difference. And it did for me, and I know it is for the kids that you're serving now. So it's glad to be here. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm just going to check online one more time. And I do not see a raised hand. So finishing up public comment, Liz Cobb.
Hi, good evening. I'm Elizabeth Cobbs, 31 Montague Lane in Concord. I just, I understand there's a report and I wasn't able to get it online, so I was hoping that you could share it on the screen during the meeting so that we could follow along. I also wanted to commend Andrew and the work yesterday morning at the MLK event at the high school. It was a fantastic viewing. And also I think that the public support and education that it provided was really, really helpful. I certainly had a great conversation around the table with my children after that as well. So thank you very much for that event. I'm done. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, and I'm going to turn it over to Andrew to introduce Dr. Blake, Dr. Wenham. So thank you.
Absolutely. So good. I think it's good evening, right? Yeah, good evening. Good evening, everyone. I think I speak on behalf of the school committee, Dr. Hunter, and the rest of the admin team, that we are very much honored and grateful to have Dr. Khalees Warnham of KW Diversity Incorporated and Dr. Carol Blake of CW Blake Associates. Dr. Warnham and Dr. Blake have been, well over 20 years of experience in education. They have a team they are a team of retired teachers, senior school administrators, principals, college professors, and assistant superintendents. They specialize in diversity, equity, and inclusion. And they did so during their tenure. Some of the positions that I just listed. They come very experienced in helping schools to develop comprehensive equity goals while designing systems of accountability. I think what you hear today is, a very comprehensive equity audit that has been led by Dr. Warnham and Dr. Blake. This has been a 2-year process, and the process has been one of which is a thoughtful one, and one that I think we did our best to include all the voices of our stakeholders in this community, in our schools. And I do believe that the recommendations, the findings of the equity audit is going to complement a lot of the work that we are already doing here in Concord. And especially in our schools. And so without further remarks, I want to make sure that Dr. Warren and Dr. Blake, that you have all the time during this time with us to present your findings and recommendations of our equity audit. So welcome, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for having us here. I have to say, it feels on some level like home, right? We've been here for quite some time and talked to all of your stakeholders, and it has been enjoyable. And thank you for the support, because this would not have happened without your support and helping when challenges arise to fix things. And so we really just greatly want to start with saying thank you for the time and space to make this happen. It's been an enjoyable process for us as well. And so I'm going to share, we put together some slides for you to share on our presentation. The first, really, I want to talk about our approach. As Andrew mentioned, we've been in the education game for a long time. I honestly feel, I was doing some professional development at another district earlier this morning and started by saying, this is one of the most important conversations you can have, right? It is the conversation we have to have about the reality of race, racism, and diversity with our kids. We have to have this conversation. And so it has been a pleasure to work with you and have those conversations. The way that we started our research, there are tons of questions we asked, and you'll get a final report with all of the over 100 questions that we asked students and faculty, and you'll have that. But the overarching question that we had in the back of our mind of every question was, how do your stakeholders in Concord and Concord Carlisle experience equity? What recommendations and action steps did they identify that would help district to become more equitable? It was always asking, how do we get better from your perspective, and how do you get better, and how are you experiencing equity? That was always the overarching question we tried to move forward with. As you know, we did this with surveys. We surveyed your student population from grades 6 to 12. We did surveys with your family and caregivers, and we did surveys open for your faculty and staff. Each survey was open for about 2 weeks to give folks time to complete the surveys, and we collected the data from that, and then we began to thematically code that. You'll see all of that explanation in the methodology. But that was our goal. After we did the survey data, we took conclusions from that as well. We then went on to go, so we go from this really large question, and we just tried to focus it and narrow it down and down. And so from the surveys, we then went to.
Then we went to the focus groups, and the title of their focus groups was called Acorn. If you really begin to think, an acorn falls from the tree, a very, very small thing, plants itself in the ground, and over a number of years, a huge tree grows from it. So the power of one acorn was really, in a sense, of empowering the landscape. So for us, the acorn was that there were 5 questions that we really asked as we went through the focus group. One was achievements. Now, there are a lot of great things that Concord has done. And that really came out when we talked to all the stakeholders, and we were able to talk about, these are the achievements that we feel that the school has made and done. So that was important to start off with that positive attribute and move forward. Then became, what are the challenges? What were some of the challenges that you face in order to hopefully continue these achievements? So then that listed several challenges, and begin to use those challenges as growth, not necessarily just that these are challenges you get stuck there. So after that was obstacles. So sometimes you have challenges, but sometimes there are things that prevent the growth that we want or get in the way of the movement. So we talked about, what were those obstacles? What are the things that you felt was impeding the advancement of the movement forward? Then at the end of it, we wanted to give their recommendations, because voice is important. We wanted to hear from them, what would they recommend in the sense of making change? What would they recommend to keep going forward? What would be your recommendations? And a lot of positive recommendations really came out, and some of those recommendations will reflect in the recommendations that we made, because we made our recommendations based on what we heard and based on what we saw. And that therefore become not just getting the recommendations down the views, because okay, here's the recommendations, but we really took into account individuals' conversations and voices. Then the next is, what was the needs? If you wanted to live with these recommendations, what do you need in order to make these recommendations? Or what is it that you need to be able to move things forward in issues of DEI? So those were the conversations that we had in the focus groups, and we asked questions, those were questions, and then that people just randomly talk through and talk about how did those components fit in with their beliefs and ideas. And as a result of that, we came up with, say, about 7 major categories. When we talked through, one was relationship and connectedness. That people, that how we connect, what are the relationships, how the relationships impact the work that we do and the work that happens. Awareness of barriers. What are some of the barriers that impact people of color? And then what are those, and how can you see those barriers, and how can we begin to dismantle those barriers? The other was supportive environment. What types of environment, supportive environment, do we need to have in order for people of color to feel supported, move forward, and be part of the community? Then we talked about welcoming and sense of belonging. How is the community welcome? Is the school system welcome? And what's in there? Do you really feel as if you are part of the school system? And not an additive, but you are part of the school system. And being part of the school system really comes to connecting, helping address the DEI related concerns. And that's not just on social, but how do we address those in our curriculum? How do we address those in everyday interactions with both teachers and teachers, students and students? And what are those issues of how we track them? Then the whole idea of dismantling racism. How do we go about dismantling? How do we, and you know, there are many issues that are part of how do we begin to unravel it? How do we begin to say, these are the areas we can be better in, these are the areas that we're doing great in, and how can we build upon those? And the last part is voice, in the sense of making sure that everybody's voice is heard. Because as we went through this, we made sure we listened, and a large part of the opportunity was really a listening. Wasn't coming in with 10 ideas, wasn't coming in with a set of beliefs. It was listening to all the different voices from students, parents, and community members, and really beginning to take those voices and really put into action as we begin to look at our recommendations. Now, the recommendations came into several areas. One of the recommendations that you will hear see is hiring and diversity. Another aspect of that is MECO and BIPOC students. How are they doing? What ways can we improve and support? Professional development was what are we doing to make our teaching staff more developed in this area? And a lot of the teachers even ask for specific areas of professional development. Then family and community. How do we combine and connect family and communities along with the school system? Not necessarily having the school system there and families and communities there. What are the connectedness that we can support families and communities? And the last is student involvement, because that's what we're about. How do we get our students to get more involved in various aspects? How do we get all of our students involved? So those are our recommendations will be based in those areas as we can see this evening and in the final report for working on.
So let's start with some of those strategic recommendations. I'm asking you to give me permission, but answers great, thank you. Hiring and diversity. I think this was really, again, we not only looked at what faculty said, it was really important to hear from your students and your families as well. And I think for the most part, all of them agreed on needing to diversify staff. Like, I'm gonna skip this and come right back to it. Just want to show you on the screen, the green bar is strongly agreed. And this is what your students said and your families and caregivers. Your faculty looks very similar, but I just wanted you to have a visual, a shot of faculty and your students and your families are saying, we want more staff of color if possible. I'm gonna back up here. Here's the thing that really impressed me, that a lot of your staff, not just your staff, but your parents as well, said, we want to have an ambitious goal for diverse hiring, even if it's something that we can't accomplish. Something about stating a very ambitious goal was clear, and it was echoed from one stakeholder to another. And when I say stakeholder, I mean one stakeholder group to another. It wasn't something that we just heard one time. It was something that we heard several times in several different stakeholder groups, that they wanted the goal to have an ambitious goal for hiring, even if it seemed unattainable. And then, of course, we got a lot of suggestions about how to go about that. Some wanted to make sure that there was a mentor program for staff of color. Some wanted to suggest bringing in a cohort of staff of color. I know that there are districts similar to Concord that are combining together and going to colleges and universities to talk about having some incoming programs. And then making pipelines with their current staff that are in lower positions. It's very possible. Develop an incentive program to address the housing concerns, because that's a big piece, especially in our state of Massachusetts. And so although they want an ambitious goal, they want and are asking for an ambitious goal, they are also thinking of practical concerns of the hurdles they're gonna have to overcome to make that very possible. The first quote from the focus group is a direct quote: "We need a person of color in administration." They just wanted more and more of that. I do think it's important to say, and I honestly believe this can't be understated, that every faculty, not only every faculty, but even student group, every stakeholder group we went to talked about the accomplishment of having Andrew's role in place. And there was just not one stakeholder group that we talked to where that wasn't mentioned. And so they're seeing progress and they want that to continue. And so that wasn't a surprise as much. I'm sure that I'm not telling you something that's a surprise to you, but it is what's different about Concord, because again, we do this in other districts, is that folks in Concord said, make the goal even if we can't accomplish it. That we want to set the bar as high as humanly possible, even if we can't accomplish it within this period of time. That says a lot. And so I wanted to show you the data. And again, some of the conversations talked about how important it is to diversify staff and to have more perspectives at the table. Faculty really talked about that as well. And thank you.
Then the other part that it became was medical and bipartisan. This became an important part of Concord, because for at least for 20 years, I've been working, been associated with Concord through medical myself, and then being one of the founders of EMI. I think I've been through at least 3 of the superintendents, with the new one, the 3rd superintendent that I had some working relationships with. And that MECLA has always been an important part of this town from the times that I was in Lincoln for 17 years. So what came out was that really that MECLA was still an important part of this community. And what people wanted to do was how do we get more involved? And we had MECLA students, how do we get them more involved? And I'll show you on the graph, the number of people who said we need more involvement, we want more involvement. And so therefore it was beginning to, but part of the involvement was that they are there, but how do we get them to back and forth? And one of the crucial things was really begin to have guaranteed transportation, having a real solidified transportation, so that these are opportunities that youngsters can come in and can get help, stay after school for help, and become more active in the part of the community. Now, I know you have late buses going, but the idea that people said is that we need to somewhere sort of solidify that transportation or make it more permanent or so that more accountable in transportation. The other was not only increasing BIPOC students, but also all students into the AP level courses. That many said that when you go to the AP courses, it begins to turn that you don't see as many of the students of color in the AP. And they felt that, many people have felt that it was not that people were not able to do it, but that they just were not. And even though what can we put in place to help students get into more AP classes, and even if it means we start earlier, summer programs or various programs to put in place, so by the time the students get to that, they're ready for AP courses. And that's when you look at the folks with data that we could get more MECLA students participation in transportation. MECLA students don't feel part of the community, and some people felt that because the transportation not being here often, that really did feel part of the community. And
Can I add to that? We're both former MECLA directors, and we know that you have late bus and you put it. I think part of what came out of this was that if we could get our faculty, your faculty to know and have access to when the scheduled buses are, like, it's not just the students, and as a medical director, I was always championing, there's a late bus, you can stay after X, Y, and Z to the students, but I think there's a missing avenue that our teachers need to know what that schedule is, so that they could too. It's different to ask a student to stay after when you know there's transportation than when you don't. And so some of that, I think, is doing what you already do well, but amplifying it, right? And I think you gotta let the right people know of when that is. And even if, I know there are some districts that have vouchers for people to be able to do that, so that when there's an emergency, a teacher can have a voucher to make sure a kid gets home for a van, like those kind of things. But I think it's your teacher population that needs to know or feel as if there is transportation available, because there was a hesitancy, and they just expressed of pushing harder because of that, right? And that's why they use the word guaranteed transportation is what they asked for. And that was in, again, everything, all of the strategic recommendations we're sharing, we heard over and over again. This isn't just a kind of one-shot great suggestion we're bringing forth.
And that came through planning and accountability. Because people can plan, if they know, because then they can plan in the sense of accountability, knowing that this is going to happen every Thursday or 3 days. And the idea people felt that one day late bus was not enough, because it just means that you come in one, but then you miss all the other opportunities to get help, or you miss all the other opportunities to participate in a wide range of activities. Now, when we look at the next slide, it says the number of students participate, but everyone felt, that everyone felt the need to have more participation. And then when we look at that, look at the points, we can say that increase versus that people felt it would be the increase. And if you look at one, that the first one is the middle school, and said that in the middle school, a large portion of it said it should stay the same. That they felt that there's still a lot of activities that's happening in the middle school. But then when you get to the high school, it's on the right, they thought there needed to be more increase. And I think that's probably because there are more activities, there's more engagement at the high school, and that's when a lot of activities are where the students may not be able to get involved. So even when you look at the middle school and high school, everyone is saying it needs to be more involvement in that.
Absolutely. Can you advance it for me? Thanks. The next strategic recommendation, professional development. And we're pulling this mainly from, of course, faculty and staff had a high weigh-in on this piece as well, but parents did speak to it as well. Students didn't, but parents and caregivers as well as faculty did. The biggest takeaway for me from this piece was that they want more PD. And not just general PD, like they were really specific of what do I do when, right? They wanted the specific, my everyday kind of, these are the everyday questions I have that I get frozen at or I get stuck at. And it wasn't just so to have the right PD, but they needed the more confidence in that. So much so they were saying things that I know that at one time you were members of EMI and that you were requiring, they would say things that we used to require the EMI course. Why did we ever stop doing that? And I don't know if it's that, and it's not necessarily that you have stopped doing that, it's that somehow they think the expectation of getting it, of completing it is now gone. And they were saying, tying it back. One teacher even, the quote here was attaching DE and IB goals to our evaluations, right? That's a direct quote, but that was a quote we heard more and more. It's very rare for a teacher to say, evaluate me on it. I care about this so much, evaluate me on it. But we heard this over and over again. And so, but again, they want specific how-tos. How do I do this? And when do I do this? And who do I go to in that moment? And so they were even, one suggestion was even using, giving them stipends for taking different courses and wanting to do this. And so investing the time, I don't think would be a problem because they were excited about doing it. They just want more directive and actionable steps. And that came through over and over again. If you look at if you look at the next slide, the green represents very important. The question that we asked here for faculty and staff is, how important is it for me to be able to do the following at my school? Participate in professional development that includes analysis, skills, and commitment to dismantling racism and centering equity for all. And that green line says very important. The next one that just says somewhat important is the blue line. You have to see that this is a value that they're asking for and saying they want more. And we know that study research tells us that professional development, when it is close to the reality of their school, when it is close to their daily activities, you get more out of it, right? And that, again, we weren't surprised to see that. I think the surprising piece was the dedication of which Concord public school teachers were saying, hold me accountable to it. Like that just, we do this, but that added piece was really.
I think also it shows the commitment of the school system. In the sense of professional development, weighing professional development as an important part, because they're used to it. They're used to having professional development. Now what they're saying is, can we now have some specific professional development that's going to help their issues real daily and fast.
Absolutely. And it ties to the next question we asked of faculty and staff. This question says, when a sensitive issue of diversity arises in class, how easily can you think of strategies to address the situation? Right? And the bright green, the Kelly green there says very easy. So it's not very many of your teachers that feel like I can do this with automaticity, right? That they have it, that it's not, they have to make a conscious decision to do it. And even that, and so your blue says easy, and the yellow is neither easy nor hard, and the light blue is difficult. That's something we have to address that I think you should address through professional development that they're asking for right away.
The family and community. It was really a great pleasure in talking to the parents and the community, because there's a sense of commitment that I think is very high in this community as far as parents, and that they want to be engaged. They want to be part of the system. And sometimes parents can be seen as not as part of the problem, not as part of the solution. But the parents many times, they want to be part of the school system. How do I get included? How does my voice get heard? So the piece of that recommendation is they're providing parent workshops on anti-racism, because they have said, my child comes home and says, sometimes I don't know what to say. I don't know how to help, help it. So if I could get more tools in my toolkit to be able to help them to address these issues or walk them through this issue, then therefore it would make me as more empowered and be able to support the school system and increase the collaboration between DEI and the town. Because when there are workshops that are happening in the schools, a lot of the parents say, how do we get involved? Where are we at that? So do we have, when we talk about professional development for staff, it's the same thing that they're asking for professional development for themselves and how they do it. And one of the things really came out is outreach to the community to help us with other cultural events. The important piece is that a lot of the parents felt that they have some expertise that weren't being had. When we look at some of these events, that many of them said that we're coming from different parts of the country, different parts of the world, and those are experiences that we could bring to the classroom. And so they're lived experiences. So it's not just a book, but it's lived experiences and those who have experienced it.
They want to be seen as collaborators with you in this work. Parents would say over and over again. Okay. Okay.
And, very good. So then it says, no procedures. What they wanted to do is that sometimes there are things that are going on the school and that they just need to know what are the procedures that they need to follow. When something happens, what do I do? Or when there are issues that impact the race called identity, how do I get those addressed? Or how do I do it? So what's the process? All they want to do is that they're willing to work with, they just need to know what's the process and how do I go on board.
And I think that ties into the last strategic recommendation we're going to give. So I'm going to go ahead and go to the next one of student involvement. And this one here, ensure that DE&I topics, we heard from faculty, but I don't think there's a very clear line. There's a clear desire to increase DE&I curriculum at the elementary level, but there wasn't a very clear example or specificity of what they're asking for. They just want more help. And I mean, so much so the quotes, I'm not even reading the quote, but I remember teachers saying very clearly, I need more than just diversify my books, right? And so that kind of feeds into special education. I mean, that feeds into the earlier piece of professional development for staff as well. But student involvement, your preschool teachers as well as your elementary teachers just said, I need to know how to do this more, right? And I need it in the curriculum, but I don't know where and when, that they're asking for. And then that feeds into, I'm gonna have it back. Thank you.
Since you further myself, student development, is that really need to develop, issues around, tasks around microaggressions, finish bias, reporting process. Because a lot of students have felt that when something of this happens, how do I report? Who listens? And how does it get dealt with? Because they're not familiar with what, in some cases, I think some schools may be more clear than others in what you do, but how do we do it from a system perspective? Of how do we report this? How do we not only report it, but how do we log it in? Because if you look at the draft, you can see that the green is there have been no incidents.
And that's actually good, right? Like when you look at that and you say these kids, the question, ma'am,
Yeah.
the question there says, I've been called names, insulted, verbally assaulted because of my race or ethnicity. And your green are reporting, I haven't been. That speaks wonderful. But then when you look at the blue says, yes, I have, but I never reported it.
So even if you're talking about, even if that's a small number, it's important because if it's only 10 kids who are feeling that something happened and I never reported, what happens to that individual?
Yeah.
You know, as time goes on, that it has to be reported and how they feel about themselves and doing. So the idea is not so much that you're doing a great job because there are some large number who have not had that experience. But we can't just rest on the laurels and say, well, it's that. We've got to deal with the other areas of blue for those who have had and did not report it or did not know how to go about reporting.
And that was your 9th and through 12th graders. These are your 6th through 8th graders. They too, same thing. They just, even those that are experiencing it have no place to report it or don't know how to report it. And that's key.
And the larger number of that is that a lot of the students of color, where the larger one said, I don't know how to report it. I don't know what to do. Or is anyone going to listen to me? And so I think you've done a great job. You're really doing a great job. And that this hope is just giving you that you've got 5 steps. You got steps. You got to get up to your, let's say, bump. You got 3. You're up there 3, but now you've got 2 more steps before you're going to rest and get to that thing. So I think that's the idea of hopefully that's how do we address those other 2.
I will say, we will turn in a final report to you and it will have, the appendix will have all of the answers to the questions, all of the surveys, and you'll be able to look through that. But for the most part, the themes we saw over and over again were those 7 themes. And we really made recommendations for the 5 listed. So hope that was helpful.
One thing that I was a middle school principal, so I've always asked for love for middle school. And that in the questionnaire is that the only students, the only people who wrote comments in the questionnaire were the middle school students. And they were very specific, and some said this is too long. There was a set of comments that they made that was so poignant. That I think, so that even says a lot of where we're at in terms of what we're developing on the middle school moving up to.
Excellent. This is great to get this right now. It's great to see we're on the road here. We're certainly not done, but we are on the road. And so the report, I know there's a question about the report earlier, that will be coming later. So we have, your presentation here, which we'll share out and attach to our agenda.
Yeah, I
And-
intended it to be there today.
Yeah, it's totally fine. And,
Offices.
but the report is not available as of yet.
Right.
So do any members have questions or comments? Aisha, yep.
So I just want to say thank you. I think this is amazing. I'm Aisha Lott, I'm the macro rep for the school. I think this is amazing. I think we still have lots of work to do. I have an 8th grader and I was a former Concord medical student. So seeing how when I was a former medical student, I had no problems. I love Concord. I had no issues as a medical student here. And then seeing all the issues my son and medical students have present day is alarming. And this is why I decided to take the role on the school committee, just so the medical kids have a voice. So I just wanted to say thank you. do we see like similar, like in neighboring communities, do we see similar trends in neighboring communities?
Yes and no, right? There were clearly places where Concord stood out, and the ambitious goal, even if we can't attain it, we want that, tie it to our evaluations, like that. It was almost visceral. There was a desperation to get this, to do the work. I'm willing to do the work here, that I see, but not to that level of, come on, we gotta get better at this, was, I think, really wonderful that I saw here. The themes, I would say, I see in every district, right? The sense of belonging is a big one for students. That's a big piece you always want to see. Hiring more staff of color. Your neighboring towns are all doing the same thing, or stuff that is a concern for those stakeholders. But you gotta find a way to benefit from the fact that we're all have that same question, and there are collaborations being made through different towns.
And when you look at, especially when you look at Harlem, you're only competing.
Same as
The surrounding towns, whatever it is that you're. So what is it that, as people say, what is it that we as Concord need to do additionally so that we stand out? You know, about that. And part of it really came as the more people of color you hire, the better chances of hiring more. Because the level of comfort, there's a level of belonging, there's a level of support.
The only other big difference, there are some minor, but the only other big difference that I think is important to note here is the last strategic plan. You really need to have a process in place for reporting. There are some districts that are right where you are, realizing we need a different process. It can't just fall under bullying, it has to have a separate process. And then there are some districts similar to you that have already developed their process. It's getting out there and it's starting where folks are starting to report. But they have not, we're not at the stage, I think, in our states, at the state level yet, where once they're reporting, now we know how to respond. We're still at the birthing place of this. And so you're not far behind, but there are some districts that I think are very similar that have already started that, put that in place, and now we're starting to, you've got to market it. You've got to, it takes 3 years to change culture. So it's going to take some time, but the fact that your kids are willing to feel safe enough to say, this happened to me and I know who to tell, is big. Another question you'll want to compare it to was, right after that, we asked the question of, is there an adult in your building that you feel comfortable talking to about academic concerns? Then we asked it again, but this time we said, is there an adult in your building that you feel comfortable asking, talking to about personal concerns? The good news is when you put those two numbers together, it gives you a sense that that Concord educators understand that there has to be an adult relationship with the child. The children have to have an adult relationship with someone they trust. That's there, so that's good. But then the next question that begs me as a researcher is, so then why aren't you telling that one person you trust that this happened? And so some of that is just marketing that piece.
And a good part is that the large number that people felt was the teacher.
Yeah.
The teacher was the one. So when you think about someone saying the teacher, and you think about professional development, how many more people feel comfortable going to the teacher? Once we empower that teacher with the ability to address those difficult conversations and the information.
If your teachers were trained to ask, the right question to ask, I bet they get more of that.
That's the long way of answering the question.
Person who's in charge of CD. So, and thank you. It's like a to-do list, it's great, perfect. I guess I'm wondering, since we do require that, my course, which is now called Ideas, for a couple of years, we had to take a break to do the FEI course, the Sheltered and Less Immersive. That was a required course for teachers, that they have to take it within their first 5 years. I feel like it's not, what you're telling me is it's not enough, or it's not, the topic is not like case studies, like this happens in my classroom and we'll do this, or like it's not directly, what are you telling me about that? Yeah.
I think it's a both and, to be honest with you.
Yeah.
I think it's a both and for them. Some were saying, outside of you have a curriculum for the Celtics. And some were saying, well, we have that, but it's not enough. And they were looking for the kind of case study things. And as consultants, I know that that's what they're asking for, even outside of Concord. They want what do I say in this moment, right? Give me some sentence starters, help me with that. And so a lot of the passion came through when I want to know what to do in that moment. But some of it too was one preschool teacher said, we have good stuff out there, and stuff at that time was defined as professional development, right? But you have to look for it and you have to know where to look, was literally a direct quote. And I heard that more than once. So it's not that you're not doing ideas, it's that they don't think that you are doing it. So you have to remind them that, look, we are doing it. Maybe when you took the SEI break, you now need to go back and say, and we're still mandating that you need to do this. And here it is. But it shouldn't be something that they have to hunt for, because that was the impression that was given, was that there's good stuff, but you gotta know where to look.
And one thing that school systems don't do well is marketing. You know, companies, market, they advertise, they make you think you want something when you don't want it. So I think that as we begin to do this, a lot of folks that have gotten the idea, well, they don't require this, they don't ask to do this. So you gotta start tooting your horn a little bit better than you have. Let people think, we got this, and this is what it is, so that making sure, so it's not a matter of them, or left up to them thinking, this, the thing is tell them, and tell them.
And then tell them you told them.
Any other questions or comments? Yep, Cynthia.
So I just wanted to get a little bit of, I was gonna ask what emotional idea I was, and I know it wasn't emergency medical subject. So, just back to I think I get what you're saying about the guaranteed transportation and the hesitancy to push from teachers. So what you're telling us is that teachers really need to have more tools in their toolbox. This probably does not apply to probably all students, but it's particularly impactful to our Metro students who don't have a lot of transportation options. So that they can do something extra with them. And she maybe present other options. I don't know how palatable the T is, the MBTA is probably not the greatest, if we don't have a bus option, but maybe just to explore the various options that we could have. But we need to then really tell the teachers.
Your educators are the ones that.
And it's not just the classroom teachers, it's the subs, and it's a whole ecosystem, right? It's a special education teacher, they might have the tutors. A lot of different people.
And even at the point of step, the teachers are asking for more opportunities for student staff, but the students are also asking more opportunities that I'd like to be part of the debate team, but I can't be here, during the only meeting on a lot of the day, we don't have a bus that day. So therefore, I can't participate. So you're missing out on such a resource there that's limited because of the physical appearance. So I think if it's like in Nichols, from that the bus is going to be there until 7 o'clock. So teachers could say, well, Mary, I need you to stay after so I can help you with this math. Well, we don't have a late bus. You know that on this day you have a late bus, so that you can be able, and see, I think that's going to help when we talk about the AP.
Yeah.
Because we can have an AP after school for the preparing students to get ready for, say, an AP in the 9th grade. Or getting prepared to do that, to be part of our debate team or whatever.
There's a different confidence level than when I say, I need you to stay after class for this. But if there's no bus, and then I can say, no, I know there's a bus on Monday, so you're gonna stay after Monday and work with me on this. It's just a different level of confidence that I think, and I think we miss the mark when we don't give them. Like it should be a daily insert in their mailbox or a daily email. Metro bus today is 5 to 7 or whatever, so that they have that information. It's a different approach that you approach the student with.
Now one of the issues, because I think some of you talked about Metro, but there were a lot of other concerns of students who live here.
Yeah.
The BIPOC students who live here, who also felt that they didn't have a sense of belonging, and they could even go home, but it's a sentiment, so it's not just a Metro issue. It's an issue also with the resident students, how they feel belonging.
And then I just want to tap into your expertise as well in a couple of things. Can you just talk a little bit more about how valuable it would be to have more parents training on anti-racism, and community involvement beyond just our school system. So how important, the value of that.
I think it helps both ways, right? Because your parents, it was a great, it's in the slide projector, but it was a great quote from one of the parents that said, I think it said that we need to be seen as collaborators in this work with them, so that one, it gives teachers more confidence to know parents want to work with you and consider us an ally to help. And in a predominantly white district, it's wonderful that's happening. Your best way to begin to diversify the exposure that your students have. And two, if your town are doing wonderful things, financially, it's smarter to book those things together. The other piece of this is that that schools are community buildings. They absolutely are, and it takes us all to get our kids where we need to get them. And so I think one confidence feeds the other.
And the two quotes, one is reaching out to families and parents more intentionally. And then it says, and then partner with them to right the ship. Was the quote. Another one was integrate all the various efforts, so the schools are not doing it on their own, alone.
Will you say that one more time?
Yes, it said integrate all the various efforts, so schools are not doing it on their own. And it says the town should be engaged, partner with the town. So I think that they're looking at it. And at some points, people want to help, but they don't know how.
Yeah.
And they don't want to intrude or being the, was it tiger moms or being, over, but they want to know where's the appropriate thing to get it done and how can they engage. And sometimes, or one time, there are things that's happening in the school around racism, and we never know what it is. And then a kid come home and tell us, and we still don't know what's right and what's wrong. And how can the school system tell us? And I know there's a whole confidentiality piece, but we have to figure out how do we do this engage so it's not left on the kids going home and telling them, how do we? And that came up numerous times. How do we get the communication from the school to home, and it's the right and appropriate communication.
And you slid right into. A little bit more on the value of having a bias outside of the legally mandated role. Sure.
I think a couple of things. The first one is more on the, just on in my mind, the right thing to do, right? I always say this to everyone needs I do this with teachers and I say, how many of you are magic? And they say, right? And the truth of it, when a kid comes to you crying and screaming, the first thing you do is kiss them and make it better, right? I had that experience. Mom kissed my boo-boo and made it better. I kissed my child's boo-boo and made it better. And there's no magic in our kiss. It's the acknowledgement. And I was a medical student as well, right? And so I lived this program as a student. I was a director of this program, totally understand this dynamic. The biggest piece that I think is hard is I need to tell my story and have someone believe me. Acknowledge my pain, whether you're gonna fix it or not, is the first time I can exhale. It's the first confirmation that I'm not crazy. It's the first confirmation that my experience is, you care enough about my experience for me to trust that you'll help me with it. So the first, and it allows me a release valve to let some of that steam out that I need to let out, because if I keep going on, not acknowledging my reality, having my reality acknowledged, I then become distrustful of my teacher. And if I'm distrustful of my teacher and my school, I learn from you like this. Mm-hmm. And that's really why the first thing you want to do is say, like, the truth is, we can't stop racism. I can't stop, and if I knew how, trust me, I would tell you, right? And it's not the absence of it, it's how are you gonna respond when it happens? And if it happens in the world, of course it happens in our schools, like schools are microcosm. And we're not bad people, but we've got to first acknowledge the possibility that and to deny a system that says, tell me what happened, is looking me in the face and saying nothing happened. That's what that does. The absence of the process tells me my reality.
Or they didn't intend for it. When you talk about intentions, impact versus intention. And the idea is the three things: knowing, caring, and acting. You can have the knowledge and we give you all the workshop, you can have the knowledge. And you can really care about what happened. But if you don't do that other part, none of it's important. Knowing, caring, and then acting, doing something. Even if they're doing something, that's yeah, okay, we're gonna work this out together. But those three have to go together, and I think that that's what people will say, that there's a lot of knowledge out there, and we care, but not, but then the actions on the falls, like you stop at the caring, and the caring sometimes, and then, okay, and then you move on, oh, okay, but we never get to the action. I think what people say, where's the action? And I go down, you've done a lot for us doing the action. You have not sat here in the past 20 years just holding your hand. And that's clear. It's clear from when we ask the questions, it's clear from when the statistics, that there's a lot going on. And I kind of, and that as we begin to look at all that's going on, and we now have to figure out how do we chunk it? What do we do this year? What do we do next year? When I look at your strategic plan and the mission and the goal, and I look at the DEI plan, how does those all mesh? There's not one plan here, it's not that plan. How do they mesh?
Terry, yep.
Thank you so much. It's been really interesting, very thought provoking. I have, you actually, what you just finished with kind of segued into my question, which is when you think about all of this, there's obviously a lot of material in here, a lot of suggestions and feedback, some of which, to Andrew's credit, I feel like we're really on our way to figuring out, or, you know, taking those steps, maybe step one in some instances, step three in others. But when you work with towns on these surveys and these reports, when you look back at towns and you're like, oh, they really listened, they like heeded the advice, and they're really working towards something good. What are some of the things you look at? How do they take it into chunks? Do you have any thoughts on those next steps? And maybe that will be outlined in your report, but.
Some of this, the idea is that first, that acknowledgement. You know, if you don't acknowledge that things are happening, things are changing, then all we do is continuously do the same thing, and then we get stuck into that. So I think the idea of really having, like when I looked at the DI plan, and then I looked at the strategic plan, there were, you know, a lot of things that are really, you know, interlocked. So the idea is, how do we work together? It's not Andrew's job, you know, to solve all, you know, all of this.
Right.
He gets paid big bucks, but don't get paid enough. to resolve. It's a matter of how do we work together as a team. Everyone, in fact, everyone has said that move for a DI for Andrew was the best thing that was one of the best things. It was not one person, even the kids, students that said it. So then when we look at it, it's a matter of making plans and then having, and not necessarily making them so big that we can't achieve them, because then we get frustrated, and the teachers get frustrated, parents get frustrated, and then we get to going back into our regular places, you know.
I think too, like I would just add to that to compliment Dr. Blake said, I think, you know, there's what we espouse, who we say we are, and then who we really are, right? And so whenever I'm looking at a district to see how you're doing, the first thing I look at is how aligned are those two things, right? This is who you say you are, and this is what I think Concord just needs to turn up the volume. I think you're doing it and not saying it enough. I think you're doing it and people don't remember that you're doing it. I think you're doing it and you're not sharing it enough. With them and reminding them enough. Like, I know I made a joke and said, tell them, and then tell them you told them. I mean that last part, right? Like, that's a big piece of this. But again, remember that no matter whatever you implement, it usually takes communities 3 years before it becomes a thing and takes hold. So even if you develop this process of reporting, it's not gonna take hold for 3 years, understand that, but the whole time you're doing it, you know it's the right thing, keep funding it, keep making it happen, and keep telling yourselves that you're doing it. You just gotta do more of that.
And the problem in education is that in 3 years, people go.
Yeah.
You know, and superintendent type is 2.5 years, 2.5 years. You know, so then your teachers go, so the idea is that it's got to be something that's gonna survive the superintendent, that's gonna survive the teacher. It's something that's implanted in this town, in this community, it's something that you believe. So no matter who comes and goes, it's there. And then it just stays there, because that's what you believe and are committed to do.
I think that's even like a good message for us.
Yeah.
Sometimes I feel like we think that things sound duplicative, you know, like we talk about the same things in April of this year, and then it seems like, well, we just did that last year, and what you're saying is, so what? Say, yeah, so, because I do think sometimes, you know, we get sensitive, like, oh my gosh, are we just doing things over and over again? So that perspective, I even think is something, you know, it's one thing for you guys in the operations side to internalize this, but I think that's a good takeaway even for us as a committee
Always say,
on all things.
say now, I'll say, so what, then say, now what?
Yeah.
Mhm. Sharon, yep.
Question, but more of a comment. Question 26 that refers to being called names insulted. That kind of surprised me, the numbers, because I think, being a mother and in the community, with other children of color, I hear things, it's not a direct insult or assault. It's a microaggression. I wonder if kids realize that that's what it is, and to report it as such, because, you know, I'm on a soccer field and a baseball field, I hear it seeping, and I think they should don't realize that's what it is, and do they really know how to report it, because it's not, you know, it's not hurting their feelings, I think sometimes they're processing it to make sure that's really what occurred. So that surprised me, and I'm wondering if you have any insight about that.
I definitely agree with you when we're talking about your middle schoolers. I think your high school kids are a bit more sophisticated, and your middle schoolers, you know, again, the comments they made just blew my mind. But here's the piece that I think the survey is not great at catching, and I don't think there's a survey out there that could catch this, is that I think what happens is, in my experience, is that those kids are often re-traumatized, especially when you're a member of a marginalized group. So a teacher said something offensive or racist or sexist to you, and you told me because I'm your friend and we had lunch. And then I go to tell Christy, girl, this is so and so, she re-traumatized, and she heard that, and I can't catch that, right? And that's the piece that I think is, you know, when they say take something with a grain of salt, that's the piece you have to understand, that we can't always catch. A survey can't catch it, and sometimes you can catch it in when you're listening to students, which I think pairs with another nugget that we found was that you had recently listened to students of color, or medical students told you their reality. You need to do that again and again and again and again. Right. Not but because for some, for your staff, for students, not all of them, but that it felt like we're taking it seriously now. That was like a direct. There was a straight line from you listen to them, and now your faculty and staff felt like you're taking it seriously, but they still need more change. Yeah. Right. Like, and so I think what happens is oftentimes in communities that when there's a trauma for one, I identify with that even though it didn't happen to me, and I'm re-injured by that, but I don't know how to report that. And I don't know where to report that. And my teacher doesn't really recognize that or see that, like.
And it's almost becomes a learned helplessness. Right. Because something is said and nothing, and they don't report it, nothing is said. So then it happens again. So you begin to have an armor that is sort of, you know, you're used to it. And if no one there is going to help you, so you just take it on and just take it on. Till finally, and one day someone said, why did this kid go off? I mean, it was only just a minor little thing. It's because there have been so many things in the armor. Now finally something got through, and it was an explosion. And it wasn't that particular thing, it was the combination of all of the things that would have been wrong in that one.
I do think it ties to the importance of diversifying your staff if and when possible. It like, to me, there's a straight line between the two. And I think of that as, in my experience as a medical director, students would come downstairs and say, this just happened in class, and everybody turned and looked at me, and I always say, well, did you look and see who they were looking at? And I say that to make them laugh, but I say it more intensely to help them understand the armor they have to wear and carry. But I can teach that lesson instantly because I was that kid and I know that kid. And I'm not saying that white teachers can't, it's just another step they have to take to make it to that. And that's like that.
But you know, it's more than just the work, because even the staff at home have some of the same issues.
Yes, very much
You
so.
know, that because they have passions to not, like, I worked in Lincoln 17 years. I used to have to go home and knock out, take my armor off and knock the dings out, so that I could go back tomorrow. And then, because there'll be more dings, and if I didn't knock them out, it's gonna get weak, and then it's gonna get to me. So that even when you talk about hiring staff, you've got to take into consideration what's happened to our students. Oftentimes happen to our adults on a much more amplified version. So it all ties, ties together. And then once when you address one, you figure out how to also address it. Because you want a staff of color to work with the student, but sometimes they might be saying, I don't know what you mean. I just left the teacher's room. So that it's a combination of how we help and work with all.
I don't know if we answered your question directly, Sharon, but
And thank you for all your hard work.
And when you look at the graph, you see that most, that when it says that it's the large part of 334 that they have in that little. Policies.
so when we did when we began to disaggregate the data from the surveys, we get, we definitely can give you just, here's how everyone answered. But then we did break it out by this student group, African-American students, white students, but so that you could see sometimes we could compare and contrast.
So you'll see that in the data as well.
It's a big document.
I apologize. And the
It's okay.
replays are-
Yep, Aisha.
I just have one question.
Yep.
Did your survey, did it show like the level of, interest in parents and staff, like wanting to know more, and like if they would be willing to, like, say, go to a workshop or some, like, similar to what Sharon said, it's, like, as a parent, I've come out here and, dealing with the school committee, I've gone to coffees, things like that, and I'm surprised at things that have said to me, and I've really questioned, as a parent, am I doing the right thing for my child? If I'm taking this abuse from adults, is my child taking this from their children that go here? So do you think that parents and staff would be willing to, like, is there interest around, like, learning more about these issues and learning more about how to better ourselves as a community?
I can say, I don't think our survey captured that, but I do think in the focus groups that we heard a lot of, and to me, these are related to your, the best way that I get it, the most honest way I can answer your question, was that in the focus groups, we heard a lot of parents of children of color, and a lot of Concord resident parents of children of color, all told really gut-wrenching stories about the reality that they live with for their children of color in Concord. And it was hard to drill down because the pain was palatable for a lot of them. And as a researcher, you're always there with the glass in between you and you're struggling to stay there when your heart wants to just say, let me hug you. And so so I say that to say, because the pain is so palatable, or palpable, am I palpable, right?
Yeah,
That
palpable.
they-
Palatable means we like it and
Yeah,
it tastes
okay.
good.
Yes, no.
You're right, I was with you,
I
but
was like, palpable,
sounded right.
palpable. That I couldn't get as deeply as I wanted to go because it felt as if this was the first time, maybe not the first time, but this was still a newer time to tell the ouch. And you can't get past the out, you can't get deeper until you acknowledge someone's pain or give them space to tell their pain. And so because of that, when I take that off and put my experience hat on, then that tells me they would kind of, like, if you put together a workshop on how to talk to young kids about racism, you'd fill the room. Like, they just were, but what they wanted more help was how do I talk to other adults about how painful it is for my child of color to live in Concord? That's, so I don't think I'm giving you a direct line, but.
Once when you look at some of the comments that are in there, because there's some history to come.
Yes.
That people have a hard time, what's the swimming, some swimming, heritage swimming or something, came up. But how do you get even into it? You get through, how do you get in, you're locked out of it. So it's a lot of things that are historical that happen that people are feeling. And some of those things you probably can't change because it's a town and it's just the way it was. But having an understanding that not everyone at this point have some of the same equal opportunity? And how do you have that conversation? And how do you help the parents have their conversation? The parents are really eager to get some more, and you just got a lot of smart parents, that's their fault. But they're still looking to say, how can I make it easier or better for my child as well? And they weren't just talking about their child, how can I make it easy for other kids?
Mm.
So that my child doesn't have to go through the same thing, maybe that.
Excellent.
We've been doing this kind of work in this district for a long time. And here we are still doing it, which speaks to the difficulties, the obstacles. There are ours, we own it. When I look at your recommendations, I'm kind of heartened, because I think we're moving on some of these. We're genuinely moving on some of these. This is very positive. We've got the will, we've got the commitment, we've got the resources. The one that really gives me pause is the reporting system. And I mean, I think we could spend hours discussing how it can be challenging. And we don't have that kind of time, but it seems to me the reporting system is fraught with risk. There's so many reasons why people don't report. We could spend a whole evening just talking about that, why it doesn't happen. But in the school district, we're talking about that. And in the town, we're talking about a reporting system. We're looking at best practices elsewhere. And I'm just curious if you can speak to whether my concern is exaggerated, or is this going to be one of the real tough spots for us to get this right?
It is, but it's one of those things that has to be a have to. And that even with the have to, sometimes comes struggles. Step into things that as you say, oops, I stepped into that. But it gets to be a habit. And what really begins to make it easy is there are two things, trust and comfort. Is that people have to feel that if I do this, that something is going to happen. Is that if I am putting myself out there and really just, then I need to know that one, you hear it. Two is that you're not going to say, it's you're wrong. Now hearing and acknowledging, and then doing something about it. And that really comes from time. It really develops a sense of trust and get a sense of comfort. Like I said, we've been working at this for a while, and this work is not easy. I mean, I knew Erwin Glover, and I knew Tom Scott, and all of those that joined the EMI.
And they were committed to it.
Right, strongly committed to it. And still is, but the pieces of it, then it takes time. And it's got, but the problem is, you can't stop. You gotta get hit over the head, you gotta be told, no, this is not gonna happen. And that you've got to be consistent and have a roadmap. And live to that roadmap.
The only thing I would add to what Dr. Blake's answer was for is that it has to become a have to, but my experience has shown that when districts aren't doing it, students are starting to ask for it and demand it. So you don't want, and so I honestly believe you either do it or they're gonna tell you to do it, or they're gonna make you do it.
I think we intend to do it. That's my sense.
We met with Belmont this morning to
Yeah,
hear about
yeah,
theirs,
that's
but
one of our models.
they're in year end.
Yeah.
Is my concern exaggerated to the point where I'm worried too much about the unintended consequences, the collateral harm that we can do if it's done poorly? Does this get away from institutions where it's because it's hard to do?
I think the things you have to realize that you're gonna make mistakes.
That's where I'm going. Yeah.
No way,
Without harming.
yeah, there's no way you can do this work or no way to do it without making mistakes. But just to make sure, but the question becomes, don't let the mistakes handcuff you. When you make mistakes, you can skip them, just pull back, and then nothing gets resolved, situations still go through it. So you're going to make mistakes, and you be something as a school committee, you have to give yourself approval that it's okay to make mistakes. And you have to give the school system approval, it's okay to make mistakes. But it's not just making mistakes. What have we learned from that mistake? What is it that we're now going to change because of what we've learned from that mistake? So if you just make mistakes to go, but then it's got to be that very process. That help?
Yeah, okay, I'm still worried.
Yeah.
That's very healthy.
Power doesn't be sitting in that seat.
I guess as a former school principal, you know, I heard all of, like, you gotta hear it and acknowledge it. And then you have to do something about it. And in my interactions with parents, when they are the parent of the child who was potentially targeted or the victim, we might say, they don't wanna know that something happened. I couldn't, it was not an easy answer to say, yes, there are consequences. They want to know, was the child suspended? Do they have to do some restorative practice to get better? Are they in counseling? Like, they want really, really specific information that I feel like would cross the line into student privacy. And so, you know, we don't do that. So I guess what I'm wondering, and having talked to Belmont this morning, is like saying, you know, we would never tell that information if it was your child who was the aggressor. So we're not going to tell you about this particular child. However, we can tell you, here are the percentages of incidents that occur. And generally, this is how we work in that situation or react in that situation. Is that like, I guess I'm worried about the
It
mistake.
doesn't sound like redress to that parent.
Yeah, right, yeah.
Yeah.
Or at least confidence.
Yeah, and that's like, when you make a mistake, you're talking about a child.
Yeah.
That's the.
There's not a lot of room for mistakes in
Yeah.
this.
And the thing is consistency. You know, if principal A, principal B, principal B, all have the same issue, you know, same way of how this is how we report out,
Mm,
then it's not like that. It's wrong, way. It's a matter of, this is the procedure, this is the process that we as a school system report and manage. Now, it can't be that principal A says, well, tells everybody everything, you know, and then principal B says, well, I can't do that. But it's a matter of consistency and a formal process. And then you can always go back on, once when you have a formal process and it's consistent.
I completely agree with Dr. Blake, right? My and would be that when parents are asking that question, well, were they consequence? I always go back to what do they really want? And what they're asking for, was it painful enough that they're not gonna do it again?
Yeah.
Right? That's really what they're asking. What's that, when they say, was you fitted with this, that question really can be flipped to, was it painful enough that they're not gonna do it again? And so what their need, if that's the question behind the question, what the need is it's a longer response. And we as principals and as a school administrator, we don't have time for that. We want to fix it, be done, and move on to the next, because the next is always already at the door. But the truth of the matter is, that parent needs another call 2 days from now. Yeah, another good Thursday. Just want you to know that I can't tell you, I'm not gonna tell you those things, because I think here's what, and name it. If you hang a sign on it and you develop the longer term relationship, they need more follow-up than anything else. And
Super helpful, because that builds the trust.
Right,
And the
right.
confidence.
And
I
that,
haven't forgotten.
yes,
Yeah.
in order to do that, it's the one thing principals don't have a lot of, and that's the time.
It's not whack-a-mole, it's, we got this, and it's
Right.
still getting attention.
Yeah. And I still got my eye on it, it's still in my mind, and your baby is still the most important child in the building.
Very careful.
Yeah.
Anyone else? No? So we have to do a better job marketing ourselves, and we have to just tell. I don't want to do this, but we did have a town school event yesterday that I'm not sure if the public knows about or if you know about. And I don't really want to put you on the spot to tell about it, but I think that, you know, I'm trying to tell, because it was a great partnership, and it's not just, there were people in this room and people in the call that were part of that. I couldn't be there yesterday, so I would actually love to just, like, 2 minutes or less, if you can just give us a quick update.
Absolutely.
If you don't mind.
Yeah, so, you know, as you know, yesterday was Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Day. And, over the past few years that I've been here, we've always held a presentation, a film screening in the auditorium, and we've always collaborated with the Concord Carlisle Human Rights Council on those events. And so yesterday was the first time that we decided to do something different. And so we collaborated with CORE, which stands for Communities Organizing Against Racism. And our vision for it, and we sort of looked at yesterday, was to get people together. I think the pandemic kind of took away that sense of being present and being with others. And so we had a breakfast yesterday that was supported by our food services director and the food services staff. And we enjoyed a meal together. We had a panel of community leaders who are doing equity and anti-racist work right here in Concord, who spoke very passionately about the work that they're doing within their organizations, right? And so we heard from the schools, both Concord Public Schools and Carlisle Public Schools as well. And we heard from our local church, First Parish, and the work they're doing, the DEI Commission for the town of Concord. We heard from the League of Women Voters. We heard from Joe Colombo, who I know is in the audience, local historian, doing a lot of work around the abolitionist history here in Concord. And yeah, I mean, it was a powerful display of the coalition that we have built around this work, because I will say this: I am not the only one doing the work. I do have a team of co-conspirators beyond the walls of the school that are really doing the work on the ground, and it's a grassroots effort, right? When we think about the values that Dr. King left with us, right? That's how he approached this work. It was a grassroots effort. It was collaboration. It was making sure that as you are doing this, as you are advancing in this work, that you were bringing folks along with you, right? Even those that disagreed with you, you still made time to have a conversation to understand their perspective, right? And so, yeah, I mean, yesterday was phenomenal. And at the end of the breakfast, at the end of the panel, we went into the auditorium and we had a film screening of civil rights lawyer and activist Jeffrey Robinson's new film, Who We Are, Chronicle of Racism in America. And it was a 2-hour documentary film, extremely powerful. Yeah, it was a great way to observe the values of Dr. King. And next year will be bigger and better. And,
That's right.
The film is very powerful.
Extremely powerful.
And I'm told it's gonna be shown several times.
Yes.
More.
So I will note there are other organizations in town that are going to screen this film, because of course, not everyone could make it yesterday. We started out with a snowstorm in the morning, right? And so organizations around town will have various screening opportunities for the community.
So I just wanted to say, I went yesterday and I loved seeing like all the people in the community that are doing this work together. That was powerful and very positive, and it was a good thing to see as a parent and a part of this community. My only issue is that I don't like the anti-law enforcement agenda that was pushed in the movie. It bothers me because it did start, I did have to have a difficult conversation with my son to explain that slavery and white supremacy is not directly related to modern day policing. My son comes from generations of law enforcement, 2 Black parents that are in law enforcement, and it did really bother me. It really, and I would hate to see a community that, sometimes the Metro kids are the only people of color they see and things, and that's a reality. It is a reality in certain parts of the country, but I think that it would be better to show, like, what we've progressed from and what we've done. a positive view on law enforcement. Law enforcement, we're not all out to kill Black men. We're not, that's not what I do. That's not what my ex-husband does. That's not what we do. And that's what, and it was a hard conversation. And it was, you know, it was a hard conversation on the way home. I went out to lunch with, just to explain further, like, this is not, I don't want you to ever be embarrassed as to what your parents do. Your parents put your life on the line every day, not knowing if we're gonna come home to you, but we do it for a reason. And the anti-police I just think it was, to me, it was disturbing to push that agenda. That's all.
I'll pick up on that, Alicia, because I'm thinking back now. And the filmmaker said that law enforcement is on the front lines of racial equity, but they didn't show it. The images, which were super graphic, showed the story that,
It was like we talk about something positive and come back to a video of someone getting killed. It was never like, all right, where do we go? Where do we go from here? Like, maybe like, you know, all right, show movies like that, that's fine. But then like, show something that is relative to Concord, show something that's relative to Massachusetts. You know, show one of the biggest police departments in the state, how diverse it is. And, you know, what things that, you know, what they've done. I mean, I could do that personally. I can put on, you know, like, it needs to, I think that we need to have them, like, a lot of those things were based down south in a different part of the country. And doesn't, you know, it's hard for us to relate here, because that, a lot of those things don't happen here, so.
You know, one of the things that I was strongly, just to really get the kids in to see embrace. Yeah, because that's the only monument on the counties that's now a war monument.
Right.
It's designed for love, or peace. So it's really good to the sense of really getting the kids into understanding the history. The film was really powerful.
Yeah, I just want to say, you know, thank you for putting that event together, and thank the people in the audience who also participated. I appreciate, you know, when something is stinging like that and just disruptive to your family, when you, that is, and like you said, none of these things are perfect, you know, and I think there's a lot of historical information in there that is really eye-opening to me as somebody who thought they knew it all, right? So that's what I think the value in it is because we're such a young country, but so much of our history is based in slavery and Jim Crow and events that aren't that long ago, you know? So it's sort of like, I think he sort of, you know, we push it up and then we just fall back down. It was one event, you know, the assassination of Martin Luther King, so much progress has been made. And then it just sort of all went through, you know, for generations. Anyway, and, you know, I think there's a lot of value and I really appreciate your comments. And I'm glad they're on this film, so.
Yeah, and I mean, I will add, and I hope we do get this opportunity, we are working to bring Jeffrey Robinson to Concord. So
Wait, you talk to me.
there's a lot in the film that we can unpack. So we're working on
I think we need to, it needs to be from different angles, and we
Yes,
need to
sure.
have a more
Absolutely.
positive, because I just think it's irresponsible to sit there and show children, that, and then not show anything on the other side of it.
Right.
You know, so if you have him come, that's fine, that's great, but also have someone, you know, someone from the city of Boston or from Massachusetts, show the positive side of it and how we've progressed and what we've done.
Yeah, great.
Well, thank you so much for your time with us tonight. This was really great, and we're looking forward to the report, and we will certainly be in touch. You've had a relationship with us for a long time that I'm sure will continue, and I think I told you a million years ago, I did the AMI course with you specifically, so I feel like I've known you for a while, even from a distance, but that's okay. So thank you for your time, and with that, I would like to adjourn the Concord Carlisle School Committee. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.